people called me Cain. And now I'm not so sure. If I wasn't Cain, what was I?
In this video, I am going to take a closer look at the character Lena from the film Annihilation, and the ways in which the film attempts to represent her confrontation with the unconscious mind. Approaching and confronting the unconscious was one of the primary areas of focus for the famous psychologist Carl Jung, and much of his work was dedicated to the processes and phenomenology that occurs during these life events. Much of what is described within Jung's books is done so in abstract and metaphysical ways, as opposed to being more concrete and objectively observable. He was a firm believer that the psyche can only be understood from the perspective of each individual. This film seems to be a fitting complement to his ideas, as much of what is being shown in the film can be seen as expressing metaphorical and abstract ideas, in which character actions represent more than what is apparent on the surface. I hope to use the remainder of this video through the language of analytical psychology and related ideas to explain what is occurring in the film and how this is supposed to represent a journey through the psyche. With this information in mind, let's get into the analysis. At the 15-minute mark of the film, Fentress is speaking to Lena about the shimmer, and she describes it as
a religious event, an extraterrestrial event, a higher dimension.
However it may be named, it is a massive, unknown force that is expanding over time and encompassing large amounts of land. Despite the data collected, it's something that cannot be described in materialistic terms. It's metaphysical and abstract in nature, something which is beyond the reach of our own empirical descriptions of the world. Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious can be viewed similarly. It is a postulate which cannot be confirmed or denied in physical terms. It can only be described as an experience through the psyche, observed directly through each person's subjective perception. The only way to know what the event is to experience it through the psyche, and to then return back to our everyday physical world. Likewise, the collective unconscious can only be experienced by each individual observer, requiring that person to assimilate the unconscious contents and synthesize them with ego consciousness. In addition to our immediate consciousness, which is of a thoroughly personal nature and which we believe to be the only empirical psyche, even if we tack on the personal unconscious as an appendix, there exists a second psychic system of collective, universal, and impersonal nature which is identical in all individuals. This collective unconscious does not develop individually, but is inherited. It consists of pre-existent forms, the archetypes, which can only become conscious secondarily, and which give definite form to certain psychic contents. At the 37-minute mark of the film, in a scene which takes place following the events of the shimmer, Lena describes to the scientists the ways that mutations and changes become more extreme the closer they get to the lighthouse. We can view the lighthouse as a metaphor for the place that guides, the area in which there is to be great psychic illumination, protection, and salvation. She also mentions how things began duplicating, doing so while looking at the tattoo on her arm. She has somehow generated a tattoo of the Ouroboros while in the shimmer, which Anya also had on her arm prior to entering. In another metaphorical use, the Ouroboros is an ancient symbol which is regularly depicted as a dragon eating its own tail. It is often associated with the motif of man needing to kill or destroy himself in order to prepare for a rebirth of a higher spiritual being. The process of confronting and engaging with the unconscious is one that has the possibility of ending in a spiritual regeneration, like that depicted within the symbol. The lead scientist proceeds to ask if she was hallucinating the things that she experienced, but she denies this idea as it was all shared among the women. She also mentions how the whole thing was like a dream. When one is faced with the unconscious and must integrate its contents, the technique of active imagination is often used in therapy, which may induce hallucinations and breaks from reality. This is often combined with extensive dream analysis in order to better understand the unconscious processes. Through these techniques, one is able to better understand what the unconscious is trying to communicate and what needs to be changed in one's individual life. The shimmer seems to be operating on a similar level, in which it is acting as some form of shared hallucinatory imaginary experience, in which each person, specifically Lena, is being asked to confront that which lies outside of consciousness. They need the shimmer to bring out what has been hidden. At the 38-minute mark of the film, while rowing the boat through the river, Lena is speaking with Shepard about the other women on the mission. Lena talks about how she has lost her husband, and Shepard explains how all the women on the mission are attempting to move on from an older version of themselves. Shepard says,
volunteering for this, it's not exactly something you do if your life is in perfect harmony. We're all damaged goods here.
Each one of them has not been able to correct their life through their own volition. One of the goals of a confrontation with the unconscious is to fuse the unconscious with consciousness, as the unconscious should always be seen as a way to provide a compensation for what is lacking in consciousness. It seems like each member of the team has willed their way to this point of their lives, leading them through a series of self-destructive patterns, but in order to repair themselves, they must face the darker parts of their personalities. Real liberation comes not from glossing over or repressing painful states of feeling, but only from experiencing them to the full. By accepting the darkness, the patient has not, to be sure, changed it into light, but she has kindled a light that illuminates the darkness within. By day, no light is needed, but if you don't know it is night, you won't light one, nor will any light be lit for you unless you have suffered the horror of darkness. At the 53-minute mark of the film, Lena asks Ventress about Kane and why he joined the mission. She wants to know the reason from a psychological point of view. Ventress explains that he wasn't aiming towards suicide, as Lena implied, but was instead aiming at self-destruction. She mentions examples of herself and the other women on the mission, and how they all have lived their lives in self-destructive ways. They have been unable to deal with life in a healthier fashion, and so have led lives that aimed at harming themselves and in turn harming the people around them. They have been unable to find a conscious way out of the bad habits and roadblocks that have continually met them along the way. The opposite of self-destruction is self-creation or self-unity, but this means hard work and realization of unconscious contents. Due to this difficulty, most people don't aim at that higher level of being and instead go the route of annihilation. This scene exemplifies how much of the film is focused around Lena gaining more and more information about what happened to Kane while in the shimmer. At the same time, she is also reflecting back and remembering her affair, which may have led him away from her in the first place. She is needing to go through the process of confronting her shadow, one of the central archetypes of the collective unconscious. For her to move on in life and find a new path, she must confront and come to terms with the things she has done in the past, whether they be conscious or not. At the 58-minute mark of the film, Shepard has just been killed, and the group is trying to decide what they're going to do next. When dealing with the unconscious, one is often tempted to abandon the mission and return to the previous knowledge base. The fear and inclination to turn back comes from venturing into the unknown and unexplored reaches of one's mind. At this point of the film, most of them are feeling their minds turning on themselves, with the fear of being psychically torn apart. In the next scene, Lena is speaking with the scientist and says,
I didn't know what going back meant, why it would be safer than going forward.
The others on the mission were more conflicted in their need to go back, but Lena had an intuitional knowledge that she needed to go further. She had an unconscious knowing of the need to move away from her old life patterns. Even though going deeper into the unconscious is more treacherous and may potentially lead to psychosis, it is also the path to a new life, to a higher self. To become a new person, one must go deeper into their mind than ever before, risking their ego stability. Once the unconscious content has been given form and the meaning of the formulation is understood, the question arises as how the ego will relate to this position, and how the ego and the unconscious are to come to terms. This is the second and most important stage of the procedure, the bringing together of opposites for the production of a third, the transcendent function. At this stage, it is no longer the unconscious that takes the lead, but the ego. It is confronted with a psychic product that owes its existence mainly to an unconscious process and is therefore, in some degree, opposed to the ego and its tendencies. At the hour and 31-minute mark of the film, Lena has finally confronted the truth about Kane's death after witnessing the video of him burning alive. She then proceeds to go to the deepest point of the lighthouse, the source of the shimmer. Inside, Fentress is speaking to herself and is in some altered or possessed mental state, stating, "Now beacon, now see." We can view beacon as the light of a lighthouse which guides ships at sea, but it can also be taken as a metaphor for consciousness, as our consciousness can also be seen as a guiding post of our ego, something which provides a fixed point in the world for us, something that can navigate us around objects. The word sea can also be taken literally, but many understand its significance to experiences of the unconscious mind, as water is a primary symbol for the unconscious. Saying these words together seems to indicate that Fentress is oscillating between consciousness and unconsciousness, trying to gain a grip by not allowing her ego to be overtaken in the process. She then says,
Our bodies and our minds will be fragmented into their smallest parts until not one part remains.
She proceeds to be engulfed by light and other forms, disintegrating in the process. As opposed to Lena, Fentress was unable to manage the contents of the unconscious and fell victim to their power, resulting in ego dissolution. The position of the ego must be maintained as being of equal value to the counterposition of the unconscious, and vice versa. This amounts to a very necessary warning, for just as the conscious mind of civilized man has a restrictive effect on the unconscious, so the rediscovered unconscious often has a really dangerous effect on the ego. In the same way that the ego suppressed the unconscious before, a liberated unconscious can thrust the ego aside and overwhelm it. There is a danger of the ego losing its head, so to speak, that it will not be able to defend itself against the pressure of affective factors, a situation often encountered at the beginning of schizophrenia. At the hour 36-minute mark of the film, Lena has come face to face with the shimmer, the source that has abstracted some of her blood and proceeded to create a duplicate of her. The duplicate begins replicating her movements, mirroring all that she does. Lena attempts to fight and get away, but she is unable, and she soon learns how the duplicate seems to be a version of herself. It seems that she is needing to come to some sort of agreement with the other part, as opposed to fighting it, and when she finally relaxes, the two of them are able to come to a compromise. She then hands the flash grenade to the older version of herself and allows it to be destroyed. She is leaving the old behind and making way for the new. As in psychological confrontations with the unconscious, one must come to an agreement with the other half of the psyche while maintaining one's ego strength. When the unconscious can be accepted and integrated, it allows for the individual to come to a reconciliation and look forward to a new form of life. In the last scene of the film, Lena meets with Kane for the first time since she left the shimmer. Through their conversation, we come to understand that neither of them are the people they once were. They have both managed to incorporate the contents of the unconscious to their consciousness and in turn have transcended their old lives. They have both incorporated aspects of the shimmer into themselves, making it so that they are created from the same source. Just as in other parts of the film, we are provided with allusions to a central unity of the world. From the Crosby, Stills, and Nash lyric, "They are one person, they are two alone," to Lena explaining in her classroom how all cells came from one original cell, to the use of the Ouroboros symbol, to the mention of Maya from Hinduism. In this final scene, we are provided one last reference to some type of underlying principle. And just as with Carl Jung, he believed that unification of the unconscious and consciousness led to a deeper understanding of the true source of our world, what he eventually termed the unus mundus. Undoubtedly, the idea of the unus mundus is founded on the assumption that the multiplicity of the empirical world rests on an underlying unity, and that not two or more fundamentally different worlds exist side by side or are mingled with one another. Rather, everything divided and different belongs to one and the same world, which is not the world of sense, but a postulate whose probability is vouched for by the fact that until now, no one has been able to discover a world in which the known laws of nature are invalid. From the undeniable fact that causal connections exist between the psyche and the body, which point to their underlying unitary nature. This concludes this video on the psychology of Annihilation. Please watch my other videos regarding other TV and film characters if you enjoyed this one. Thank you for watching.